How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great discussion today. We're going to talk about the danger zone, how inmates use obligation to manipulate officers. And I think there's some advice here that could be applied to the real world. So hopefully if you're from the outside looking in, you stay connected to what we're going to showcase today, because I think you can apply this to the real world setting. Today, my guest is going to be Russ Hamilton. Now, guys, this is pretty much 101 dialogue. We have a few questions that were sent our way that we're going to answer. Some questions we've covered before many times, very 101. Some questions are a bit more involved. Me and Russ are going to go ahead and speed through those questions and answers to give you some good information that hopefully gives you a solid foundation for what this lesson will be about today. Now, guys, if you haven't gotten a chance, please check out our many books. I have a few out there in the market. Russ has a few out there on the market, which he'll mention his, the one that he has right now, and I'm sure there's more to come. And then as of right now, if the lesson we're doing today, I would definitely want to get this book, Breaking Boundaries. This is about undue familiarity. That's available in both softcover and ebook. You can get that on Amazon. And then you also have Inmate Manipulation Decoded. This is also geared towards the same topic of manipulation. This is very outcome-driven, very good book, available both in softcover and ebook. And then all these other books I have are all ebooks right now. So Surviving Without a Mentor, Ranked Before Ready, Warden's Wisdom, Corrections Interrupted. This is dealing with the aftermath of a critical incident, From Reaction to Reputation. This is good for officers on the front line, new to senior. Then we have Behind the Gates. That's for civilian staff working with medical. And then Russ will give a shout out to his book. And this is what we'll be working on again shortly. That's called Inside the Hide. Let me get Russ in. What up, Russ?
Good morning, Anthony. How's it going, sir?
Good. Hey, Russ, you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Sure. My name is Russ Hamilton. I am a former and retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I am also a former senior juvenile correctional officer. I currently work for a private company where we do reentry and rehabilitation work at a county jail and at a probation department. I am also the founder of Keepers of Chaos with a K on Facebook, where we provide mentorship and training and content and history and camaraderie and everything to anyone and everyone who works inside the walls, not just the people with the badges. And I am also a new author of a book called Killing Complacency, Tactical Awareness for Correctional Professionals. And I think it's a book whose time has definitely come. Complacency gets blamed for everything, and yet no one ever talks about its causes, its roots, or how we can actually mitigate those. And there is the cover, of which I actually was the one who designed the cover all by myself.
I love the cover, Russ. Now, guys, before we go into the video and before we answer the 14 questions that we have, got an email from somebody that watches the channel. I wanted to kind of read it real quick, and then me and Russ could provide a quick little answer. So let me get over to the question real quick. Well, I don't know if it's really a question, but maybe it's more of a comment that we could respond to. So, hello, I watch your YouTube videos, but I'm not a corrections officer. Rather, I have two stepsons who are career criminals. My oldest stepson tells me that from the inmate perspective, there are three types of correction officers. The first is the hard-nosed officer who enforces the rules and is hated by inmates. The hard-nosed officer will get stabbed, then transferred and promoted. The second officer will not enforce the rules, will not be promoted, and will be at the same prison for 30 years. The third type of officer will feel sorry for the inmates and will start cooperating with the inmates and bring in contraband. The inmates will twist and pressure the officer as much as possible until he quits, usually about 3 months. I don't know if this helps, but I do enjoy your YouTube channel. So obviously this is part of this. It's a little twisted here, but it's coming from Games Criminals Play, because he does go over the three types of officers. They're hard, mellow, and soft. And obviously officers, I mean, if you want to simplify it, they could range on a spectrum, but there's a lot of variance between that spectrum. So I wrote back, thank you so much for watching the channel. It's great to see how the other side uses the material. The material is meant to be beneficial for all sides. I wish you two would see that. But we're doing a show today about undue familiarity. I may discuss this a little bit on my channel today. Don't worry, I won't say your name. I'll do it in general, because there's a lot of variance in between that. And what he says is pretty much comes from a well-read book called Down in the Duck. But there's a spectrum, and to be honest, situations can add to the spectrum. Hard officers tend to be extremely rigid. They tend to lean on the rules as a crutch, and therefore they lack decision-making skills. So from a correctional officer's perspective, they're not really good in moments that are fluid. For obvious reasons, soft officers end up getting compromised. They tend to be a bit more gullible. But then there's the medium officer that balances both sides of the spectrum. But to be honest, there are times where one officer can be all three. It truly is dependent on the situations and how they react to those situations. But we'll discuss this a bit more in today's video. And I'd love to get your thoughts after you do the video. But Russ, I'm sure you read Downing a Duck. I mean, that's how they pretty much explain officers in Downing a Duck, soft, medium, and hard. I don't know if you remember that. Do you remember that reading?
Yeah, I've read that many times. This is kind of one of those things. When I hear things, explained back from the other side, you got to understand that, like, from my position, what I tend to see is, the criminal mindset, first of all, and then, viewing that from this kind of, antisocial lens, where, people are always being put into basically different buckets in an attempt to sort some of them out in order to try and manipulate, and maybe not manipulate the person directly, but try and manipulate them through the process and through the way we run things, And so sometimes, many times, I would say, when we have, inmates trying to make, allegations to that person's boss, or to file a grievance and to try and manipulate things to the way they want. And I may be jaded in this, but I understand a little bit of my own bias. I think it's one of those things that just tends to be used to try and get around the process. Now, I'm not saying that these archetypes or stereotypes don't exist, but many times these are things that are just used by the population to try and actually use, policy and procedure and state law and federal law in a way that kind of just doesn't end around of accountability, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And I also think that the soft, medium, hard, I mean, a lot of it really is categorized in this absolute without actually truly understanding that yeah, maybe those are what you consider behaviors, but behaviors can change under stress, can change under pressure. So you don't really want to define officers in just those three categories, because you got to look at the situation. Some people will shift back and forth. I've seen officers that are rigid, and then all of a sudden, I'm not going to say they soften up, but they start to find their grounds. A lot of rookies should be very rigid at first, and then eventually they start to try to find their way in that medium ground. The one thing you want to avoid is obviously being soft, but there is a balance between, being, I guess if you want to define it simply as hard and then discovering that medium road, but there is no soft. I'm not trying to balance out these extreme soft skills because there's no way I would actually even push that as a foundational lesson. It's more of, you're going to come in as a rookie, you're going to come in hard, you're going to sweat the rules, be very rigid. And then after that, you're going to start to step back a little bit and start to try to lean on your experiences, learn that discretion, and then find where that middle ground is. But again, that book was written years ago when basically the functions were a lot easier because there was a lot less interactions. Now you're having more interactions. So to sit there and just say hard, medium, or soft, I mean, to me, that's someone that just picked up a book from 40 years ago. And like Russ said, is trying to categorize it in regards to just the behavior without understanding how pressures affect behaviors. Because you could say the same thing about inmates too. You got hard inmates, you got soft inmates, you got inmates that just want to do their time. Parents, you could do that for almost any category.
I was gonna say, one of the lessons that I teach the participants that I work with is about thinking traps. And one of the most common thinking traps that I tend to find, inside of the inmate population is this kind of, black and white, it's all or nothing and they tend to be like really devoid of being able to see, any potential, shades in between anything. And it kind of puts them into a position where, they either hate an officer or they like an officer, but they extend that, to the rest of their lives too. They have people that are against them. They have people that are for them, and there are no neutral parties, and they get caught up in this, thinking trap, and it makes them unable to actually make any headway, if you will, with regards to their recovery, to their rehabilitation, and to their reentry into, into the free world again. And that's not to say that that there aren't officers that can get caught up in thinking traps like that too. But that does tend to be a feature of what we see from antisocial thinking types, and I mean that in the clinical sense.
Yeah. Now, guys, when Bud Allen and Diane Foster wrote that book, obviously it was years ago, and even us, when we've evolved prior to that, that was a book that we leaned on a lot, because a lot of the thoughts that are in what we talk about, the foundation comes from strong books like Games Criminals Play, but we don't just leave it there. That's like just saying also all officers must be firm, fair, and consistent. Well, what does that really mean? So, I mean, you got to have context. And with that said, I mean, to just sit there and say you're only going to have three types of officers, and hard, medium, and soft, is a very simplistic view that doesn't allow for the variance or that spectrum based on whatever pressures people face, or how certain things could benefit, but they could switch. So I think the evolved perspective is how you balance those latter two. Soft, again, that's not who you want to be. So if I'm ever teaching a lesson, I'm not going to say, hey, try to balance the soft and the hard. But I think, unfortunately, that's how the lesson has been translated. All right. So, Russ, these are some questions that come from the outside. They're related to manipulation or the growth of undue familiarity. I actually have this book out here. It's actually doing pretty well itself. It's the second book I wrote on manipulation, which is called Breaking Boundaries. It partners well with Inmate Manipulation Decoded. Basically, it's more about how the process of undue happens, noting that it is a process. So some of the questions I'm going to ask Russ today that we'll go over, some of them we've discussed before, very 101. Some of them are a little bit more advanced in its thinking, so bear with me. But they're coming from different parts of the profession, so not just correctional officers, but program providers, medical providers, etc. So obligation, I always say, is the center of manipulation, and we'll kind of get to that. But some level obligation is usually involved in the game. That was actually discovered when I was writing the book Breaking Boundaries and Undue Familiarity. I said obligation plays a big role, where in Inmate Manipulation Decoded, I did have it as a tactic. But to be honest with you, obligation and trust are very big roles when it comes to manipulation. For the first book, Inmate Manipulation Decoded, I had trust as something that was extremely foundational, pulling someone out of that prescribed role, building that trust. But there is a level of obligation that's also foundational, and that kind of where this topic goes. So, Russ, these are just a few questions. Some are more about insight, some are more about application. So, first one is: have you ever noticed a colleague getting too friendly with an inmate? What did you do about it?
Yeah, this is the kind of thing that is actually really common. And it just has to be one of those things where, we draw people, outside themselves in a way that allows them to see what that problem looks like. And sometimes it's as easy as drawing their attention to it. Hey, you're giving that inmate way too much play. And sometimes that's all that has to be done about it. But I've seen it, from that point where a person, they merely lose their objectivity. Not that I should maybe be using the word merely there, but I've seen it go from just that, all the way towards, absolute manipulation and absolute corruption. And so, you have to put your own people in check. You have to do something about the inmate. It might mean moving that inmate to a different unit. It might mean shipping them out. It might mean just, that little, hey, wake up call for that individual. So once again, like we've pointed out in the previous examples, there is a spectrum of things, and some of them are more readily and easily dealt with than others.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think for the person who is getting caught up or in the process of getting caught up, they're going to feel it before other people recognize it. I think that's important. So something as simple as an officer on a podium where the inmate should be directly in front of them, but instead the interaction's happening where the inmate is alongside them. That is something that would be recognized by us. But the first person who allowed that inmate to get alongside them, kind of sitting that perpendicular with no obstacle in between. Well, how did that happen? How did you get so comfortable to allow for the inmate to go from the front of the podium to the side of the podium? And again, it sounds little, but it's really not, because it's a step closer to what could be an undue relationship, little things. But again, it's something that we may walk in and recognize. But in order for that to have happened somewhere along the line, I believe people feel it first and they just learn to justify what they're doing. So basically, they may have something that says, hey, this doesn't feel right, but they don't act on it because, again, they're like, well, what if I'm wrong? Well, it doesn't matter. Just tell the inmate where they got to go. You're not supposed to be at the side of the podium. You're supposed to be in front of the podium. Always have to do something to keep that boundary in play, because the moment you don't is the moment you just lifted the boundary. And I didn't say barriers. I know that's another thing that, universal precaution. I don't talk to any inmates. No, that's a barrier. You're going to have to engage with inmates. That's why you have to set the boundary. And sometimes a boundary is just as simple as telling the inmate, hey, you shouldn't be on the side of the podium. You should be in front of the podium. And again, just a simple little example, but it does play out. And I want to mention something else too. I noticed this was a concern because I remember an officer that did get caught up, and we all sat there and felt something wasn't right. But I'm going to say it, whether people agree with it or not, but we didn't interact. We just kept ourselves separate from the officer. And then eventually the officer got caught up. And the biggest concern was, well, what about if there was a weapon that could have got brought in from this relationship and could have hurt somebody? I mean, everybody talks about contraband. Well, weapons are contraband. So would anybody step up and said, oh, hey, I knew something was happening, but I chose not to do anything about it. Part of the game really is to isolate that officer and to showcase that relationship to some extent. So staff don't trust the other staff member anymore. So technically that's where we have to come in. You're not heroes after the fact by saying, oh, I could have saw something. No, I may have saw something. No, you should have done something while it was brewing, why it was being cultivated. So the moment, again, something simple, you walk in and that inmate, it's not at the, again, very simple example, but the inmate's not at the front of the podium, they're at the side of the podium. Well, maybe it's, a good time to go up to the officer and say, hey, listen, can I talk to you for a second? I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong, but when I walk in, that inmate's constantly at the side of your podium. It doesn't look right. And maybe wake that person up, because eventually if you take too long, they start to justify their actions. That's where the cognitive dissonance comes in. And then their perspective starts to shift. So now it's no longer about you correcting them, but them having to justify what they feel they're doing is right. And that becomes the obstacle. Now you got your chance to correct it. Now becomes a chance where they're going to reinforce it because they don't want to prove that they're wrong. And now it's not even about the relationship anymore between you and the officer, but rather the officer proving that they haven't been doing anything wrong. And that's another thing. So again, if I had to make an approach, I would do it early because I'm assuming if I recognize it, let me get on it real quick so I don't let any wrong thoughts settle in. But for the person who is getting caught up, remember, you may feel it first before you recognize it. So listen to yourself. All right, next thing. That was good. Next question. What's the difference between, okay, Russ is going to love this one. What's the difference between building rapport and crossing the line into undue familiarity? Now, this is what me and Russ always get challenged on, because people love throwing out the word rapport without context, and rapport has context. What's your thoughts on that, Russ? I know you love this question.
Yeah, so I'll just say, what I pretty much have said in the past about rapport is that rapport evaporates the instant you bring accountability to an inmate. And the reason that happens is because rapport is a building exercise for the inmate, not for the officer. because we have a specific set of standards that we're supposed to adhere to, and I think generally we do that very well. Whereas the sky is the limit, all right, with the inmate. And so if you are out there going on rapport building missions, what are you actually doing? You're putting us into a position, all of us, but more specifically yourself, as to having to adhere to some sort of quid pro quo. In order to build rapport, there has to be a back and forth. There has to be a give and take. That is the way that I choose to look at it, because I think that it is inherently dangerous. And I think too many times we're seeing across the country where, this is becoming a standard that's being, really bolstered in policy and procedure, and it's very dangerous. What we should be doing instead is we should be building our communication skills that we can use with each and every individual inmate, and not be worried about trying to establish something, whether you want to call it trust, whether you want to call it rapport, whether you want to call it respect. It's all sides of the particular bad manipulation coin. We don't need those things for ourselves because by law and by what our duties are, what our oath and so forth says, we're going to do the things necessary to do what we already call what Anthony already addresses: firm, fair, and consistent. So we're already there with those things. That extra above and beyond just gets us into quid pro quo, if you will. And so that's, I think, a distinction that people need to carry around in their minds and be cognizant of. Otherwise, it's all about manipulation, 24/7, 365.
Yeah, and guys, it's funny. I love what Russ said, because rapport is not built on negotiating correctional directives. That's kind of what Russ was mentioning just now. Like, basically, are you trying to build a rapport, or you want to be popular? I'm not understanding that. And again, all our discussions have evolved. I mean, if you look at older videos, we've always provided context, and that's why context matters, because technically the solid foundation of our knowledge is still there. But rapport is something that I've kind of understood a little bit better contextually from Russ's videos of the past with me, and explaining, basically, again, rapport versus popularity, or chasing respect. Are you chasing respect because you feel that you need to from the inmate population? Because at the end of the day, then you're chasing for their approval. Respect will come automatically through the functions that you serve. That's how respect is built. Like, if an inmate's acting up and they say, well, Ganji, you should go talk to that inmate, he knows you. No, he has an expectation of me. He doesn't know me, but he knows what I'm about. He knows I'm a man of my word, but he doesn't know me. So I'm not going to, a guy's in crisis, and the first thing I'm going to say is, hey, you watched the baseball game yesterday, because you know that we're both baseball fans. I'm not trying to build a rapport with an inmate based on what we have in common. I know some people may be like, oh, you need it. That's how you build. That's not really, that to me, that doesn't work. I think what happens here is that it opens up a door for dialogue that goes way outside your prescribed role. I know we have little dialogue along the way to kill the time, but remember, that's information gathering, however small it may be in the moment. In the count of every interaction you're going to have with that inmate, it mounts up. I mean, from you being a baseball fan to you going to the games, to you going to the games with your son. I mean, just they're little bits of information that, oh, I'm utilizing it to connect with the inmate. Well, maybe your intent was there, but the problem is, through time and through all these interactions that we have with these inmates, they're going to find out a lot about you. And how do you know they're not using that information against you? How do you know that inmate that wasn't a baseball fan is now a baseball fan, because other inmates are telling them that you are a baseball fan? So I figure the rapports that are built, even efforts to de-escalate, are still built within the prescribed role. And when they say, well, the inmate knows you, well, the inmate knows what's expected of you within your prescribed role. Most importantly, they know you're a man or woman of your word. And that's what they will relate to most, because at the end of the day, you're not negotiating a correctional objective. William Young did a great video the other day, and it's great to get all these different perspectives because we are just one perspective. And his video was about an officer that had a concern with an FTO because there was an inmate that wasn't locking in, and the FTO was kind of harsh with the rookie, or at least that's how the video makes it look. I mean, again, everybody's going to have their side of the story. So when Will was doing the video, he's going based on the email and the perspective of the person doing the email. So with that said, the basic inmate refused to lock in, and it was lock-in time, and the rookie was proud that he was able to de-escalate the situation by ultimately having the inmate lock in under the conditions that he'll have the chaplaincy or someone from the chaplain's office visit him. Now, watching that, I get it. That's a great effort to de-escalate. But then the FTO pretty much, in how it's explained in the video, was harsh to the rookie and basically told the rookie, we run the ship, whatever it was. Now, granted, this could be just a perspective from the person writing the email, but I don't know if it was that aggressive. Again, it's a perspective of the person writing the email, but I kind of see where the FTO is coming from. A correctional objective is not negotiable. It's not up for negotiation. So how do you know the escalation or the de-escalation technique didn't go into something that was became a negotiation? Like if I tell an inmate you're going to lock in, and the inmate tells me they're not going to lock in, I may ask why. But my order is not conditional. It's okay. Why aren't you locking in? A, B, C, D. And I want to see a chaplain. Okay, well, first off, you're locking in because I'm telling you to lock in. These are concerns that you can address when you're locked in. Second thing is, if you want to see the chaplaincy, there's a route for you to do that. You can put it through whatever system it is, and you'll be seen. I'm not going to take the chaplain from what they're doing now, probably talking to another inmate, and then going ahead and pulling them from what they're doing because you're refusing to lock in. So grant that. Some people may look at it and say, Ganji, but what about de-escalation? De-escalation is not negotiation, because Russ said it before we did this video. Now every inmate can come out later on and say, well, I'm not locking in until I see the chaplain. So, even de-escalations, if they start crossing into negotiation, you're setting a precedence that, hey, don't lock in until the chaplain's here. So I don't know, what's the perspective of the FTO, but, how it was explained through the email made the FTO seem pretty aggressive. But I hope he wasn't aggressive, but I do understand the point of no. This is their order, and they got to follow the order. This is something that is not meant to be negotiated. It's lock-in time. I'll ask you why you don't want to lock in. I'll understand what the concern is, but before we address it, I'm going to make sure I'm the one under control. If there's a problem that you're having with your cellmate, okay, we'll look into it. But in the meantime, you're going to be over there. You're going to be secured until we can figure it out. You're not just going to sit here in the day room telling me you're not going in, or you know what, I'll go in, but I'll go in after if you can promise to get the chaplain. Nah, you got a route to take that. So right now you're refusing the order. So here's what you do: you either go in or you're going to get charged. It's that simple. And if that makes sense, Russ, I just wanted to comment on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that we have to be careful when we say things like de-escalation, in my opinion, because de-escalation is not or should not be just simply outcome driven. Otherwise, we simply give up everything. We cede every bit of authority and every bit of our tactics, every bit of our strategy to the other side, and then we become clearly functionary. And when that happens, that's when correctional facilities actually get really, really dangerous. So I think that there's a lot, when we talk about, a situation, or we give, an example of a scenario. I think that there's, a lot of things around it because we may not perfectly understand what was going on. But I do think that it's that, you're setting the stage for a bunch of future battles that you don't need to fight if things are resolved in a way that are not a negotiation. Okay, we can de-escalate, but that doesn't mean that we're going to, have a back and forth about exactly what's going on. We can say, hey, look, whatever you've got coming, yes, you've got coming, and we will deal with that. But you still have to lock up. You still have to go there. And if you're still going to refuse to lock up, then we're going to have to, put you in a holding cell or whatever it is that your policy and procedure calls for. If it's just always going to turn into a negotiation, oh, so you want a bed change, oh, so now you've managed, to go from a cellie that you ostensibly didn't like and were having a conflict with, to being, shacked up with your prison wife or whatever. So now we've been manipulated into a PREA process. That's no bueno. And there are always things that we can't necessarily see immediately on that are part of the manipulation process. So I think you have to be careful. Not all of those things translate well when we're giving these scenarios and talking about them, though, because sometimes there's more than one good answer to a thing, and so sometimes we have to flesh those things out, and sometimes it's necessary to even talk about things from a standpoint that we may not necessarily agree with. But then we can go, oh, so I didn't know that one particular thing, and now it makes sense, whether it's with regard to the FTO or the actual situation or whatever.
Yeah, and I still think I said it's a great video because it provides another perspective, but it would be a great video one day that we could discuss. Maybe I'll have Will discuss, and we'll both kind of back up our perspectives. But I want to make sure people know something. Sometimes when people paint a perspective, it's not so much about what they said, but how it's said. And that kind of creates a negative on the narrative or negative on the information, where, having said that, some people will paint that aggression, because maybe, they want the person to be seen in a different way, even though the advice is good. So I feel I get what the senior officer was trying to do, but it was painted in an email that the person put that FTO in a very negative light. But having said that, I wonder if the FTO was a bit more reasonable in that scenario, would people still see the FTO as being wrong? What they were looking at was the behavior or how the message was delivered. Okay, so the next one here, this is very 101, Russ, but this did come from a program provider. An inmate offers you a handmade card as a thank you. Do you accept it? Why or why not? So very 101, but what's your thoughts on this, Russ?
Okay, so here's one thing that I've learned very well, having worked at some absolutely monstrous size institutions and working at some of the smallest institutions in the country, if we just put it that way, is I think that universal precautions are good, meaning that that's not something that you can accept and take home. Maybe it is something that you could accept and display there, but there are a lot of things that some people may not understand about that type of situation. Inmates, people in custody, whatever we're going to call them, will do things to ingratiate themselves. They will also do things where they are genuinely thankful for what you've done for them. And then there's, everything in between. I've seen situations where if another inmate thought an inmate was, being too chummy with you, it could actually put that inmate's life in danger. And, there are some people that maybe have never worked in an institution where that could possibly be the case. And yet it's true. So there's a lot of, competing little things that you need to know about. In my case, if this happened with me, I would absolutely, maybe take the card and say, hey, I appreciate this. I really like what you had to say. I just can't, accept this. It goes against the rules. But I appreciate that. But I also don't want to put too much just on the rules and say, well, if it was really up to me. So there's a lot there. I think that it just kind of has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, and within the great spectrum of everything that we see in corrections, from the largest facility to the smallest, it does change things with regards to something like that.
Yeah, and what's funny is, a while ago when we did these were very cut and dry answers. I mean, they really were. It's like you never accept it because it leads to obligation and all this other stuff. But as you grow in your perspective, you could see that a card could be a reflection of what you value in regards to the work that you're accomplishing. And that's where you have to kind of set the boundaries because, again, you know, I seen people retire and they look back to see if their life was worth it. And usually that gets measured by impact. Where did they have the greatest impact? And sometimes that impact is directly with the inmate population. So program providers, treatment providers, custody providers, you know, people that provide safety and security, you know, their greatest impact may be with the inmate population. So again, there could be moments that they may reflect on that matter more when they retire. And sometimes it could be that card or something, but you have to be wary of what that card represents. Does the card represent a function that you were providing, or is that card personal to you? I like what Russ said, because part of me, still old school, will say don't accept it. You never know where it's headed, and you know, I love what Russ even said about showcasing it. But I think because it could mean something more. So right off the bat, my red flags are up, my warning signs are going, and I love, for me, what I would probably say is the same thing Russ would say is, you know, hey, I love the thought, but in the end, I don't accept the cards. That's just how I roll. And again, I like how Russ clearly mentioned it wasn't about the rules, because maybe the rules are a bit lax in that for certain departments, but that's how I roll. I don't accept the card, so you just coming up saying thank you would be just all I would need, and that would be enough to know that I'm appreciated, but know for a fact I'm not dependent on your appreciation. I'm still going to do my work. But I have seen where there are some people who aren't doing anything wrong, but there's some level of validation from the feedback that they get from the people that they're helping. And usually the cards are very, I'm going to very simplify this, but usually the cards are very functional. You know, this is what you did for me, and this is how I'm able to move forward. Very simple. It's not, you know, I needed you at this time and you came through, you filled in a gap in my heart. No, it's more of, you gave me advice to get a job, and now I took your advice and now I got a job. So I wanted to say thank you. It's more of a transactional type of card or type of gratitude. But having said that, I think it's great if you were to take the card, because I've seen it where there are thank you cards that are written, and whether it's permitted or not, I don't know, because I've seen people in very high positions hold on to some cards, and it doesn't mean that they're dirty. That just the card hits something with the function that they're providing. I want to make sure I make that clear. It's about the function that they are providing. But with that said, remember this: they are appreciating the function, not the individual. Because once you start embracing the fact that they appreciate the individual, it makes you unique. It makes you stand out. And now you are trying to live to that standard. And that standard may be what's beneficial to the inmate. So I would say it's more about appreciating the function. But again, this is you never know what's going to be a debatable question. But I think me and Russ, I was able to feed off a little bit. Russ stole some of his ideas a little bit. But back in the day, I would have said, absolute, don't take it. But I don't know. I think it's more dependent on the individual and how they embrace what's coming their way and what it says in that card. Because I have told people, don't take it, don't shake an inmate's hand. But then as you move up, when you're responsible for roles that deal with the rehabilitation side or whatever it is, you know, it's tough. Maybe you do have to shake the hand once in a while. I'm not going to say take a card, but you know, all because you took a card doesn't mean that you're compromised. So this is not a black and white question. But as I said, for me, I still wouldn't take it because I'm rooted with that safety and security mindset. You know, if you want to thank me, you could just thank me right now, right here. I don't need a card, but I have seen people that once they retire and they had an honest career, you know, I want to put that out there. They do hold on to those cards as memories of where their impact was. And these are memories that they share in their legacy. So I don't know. I think it's very dependent on the individual and what's being appreciated. Is it the function or the person? It's crazy how you asked us this question a couple of years ago. We've been 80%, 100% adamant you don't take it, but Russ is on the rehabilitation side now, so I think there's more of a value in that perspective of work, and me too. I think it's not always black and white. It's more about looking at the individual and seeing how they receive what's being written and what is actually being written. Great question. I hope it provides an answer that's beneficial to both sides. Because I think, Russ, I love what you did, how you opened it up, because I was expecting the absolute no. But when you didn't give the absolute no, I was like, holy shit, maybe there is some conditions here. And I truly do. I like where you started the answer.
I also think that from me, there's different expectations from where that is originating from. I would expect perhaps a different or more staid answer from someone in a custody role. It's been a process and an adaptation for me to go into the rehabilitation and reentry side of it, where I'm actually providing treatment to people with regards to their addictions, their criminal behaviors, and things like that. And so what's true for one role is not necessarily true for the other. On the badged side of things, I am, and I do see, severe problems in some of the things specifically that California and some other places have done with regards to placing the badged people, I think, in harm's way by forcing them to get more involved in the treatment. They can be an adjunct, but they certainly should not be providing that, because I think it interferes with their ability to do a job that may require them to make instantaneous life and death decisions. So I think that there's, if we're talking about corrections as a whole, is different from talking about corrections from the point of law enforcement.
Yeah, and I remember talking to a college professor. I don't know if this could kind of equate, but a college professor, when the year is done, they're not really supposed to take anything, but sometimes there are efforts at appreciating the instructor and the course that they provided, and they're not really supposed to take nothing. But he said in the end, when your class is done, people are always going to give the teachers something to show gratitude to the lessons learned. And we try not to take that mid-year because we don't want people thinking that it influenced our grading system. But you may take something after the year has been completed. Because at this point here, everything's done and it truly is an appreciation. So I don't know if that equates to maybe an inmate finished a program. They're not in the program, but they finished the program. And at this point here, maybe they want to thank you because this is where their next step is. Okay, fine. They're thanking the function, but they're not trying to influence the function or the thoughts behind the function. All right.
And
I'll get Russ.
I was going to say, I don't know. I think that this might be an example that helps. This past week, I started into a substitute role in order to teach a course about substance use to juveniles. And the interesting thing about this particular facility that I went to teach this is I was one of the original officers when it first opened back many years ago. And so it was an interesting dynamic for me, because now I have either a probation officer or a juvenile correctional officer there in the room with me, to provide coverage should I need any backup. And they fulfill a completely different dynamic from what I am now fulfilling. And yet I was in their place just a few short years back. My function, inside there is to be, really a sounding board for the youth, and to be able to, to talk to them about, their substance use issues, and to provide them with a curriculum that, helps treat all that. And so it's a very different dynamic, and there's, different labels that need to fulfill different functions. The officer there is for me to give me backup, and if a kid gets out of hand, then they're there to take that individual out or correct them and do all of those things. For me, inside the classroom, it's a much softer approach. I'm there to, try and facilitate, a path for them to, get back to doing the things that a youth should be doing in life. And so I think that, we really have to be able to be empathetic in a way to understand all of the different, I'm not talking about empathy towards the inmates or the youths or whatever it is. I'm talking about empathy with regards to the other labels that are, providing something with regards to things inside that correctional facility. And so it's been an interesting week for me.
Hey, but Russ, it's a great full circle too. I think this is a great way. Like if I had to step into something different, I mean that would be another route. But I think when I retire, I retire. But it's great to, see that full circle, because that's why the content is fair here, because we have, the complete circle present, even just with the both of us. So how do you respond when an inmate starts asking personal questions about your family? Can I add something to this just in context? Because I've seen program providers that have a narrative that involves the experiences with their family. So again, if it relates to the narrative, if it relates to the context of, what the lesson is learned, I don't think I've seen it well delivered where they're not yelling out names, but my parents weren't there, blah, 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 but it relates to the narrative of the hardship and resilience. But if they start digging into, what's your mother's name, or where exactly do you live, and all this other stuff, you have to be very careful, because this is actually interesting, because when I was a new boot, there was an inmate that had just came into the system, a bit wild, was a fighter. Remember, I started at a female facility, was a fighter, was from parts of Atlantic City. Now, if you guys are from Jersey, you should know that Atlantic City isn't the best areas. They have some pretty impacted parts of Atlantic City. Let's just say that, by poverty and whatnot. So there are people there that right outside the Atlantic City, right outside where you gamble, it's a very tough neighborhood. When this female came in, she was in reception area, and then she got placed into one of the housing units and got into a fight immediately with multiple inmates, held her ground because, again, this is what she thought she had to do. And then I remember putting the cuffs on her and taking her for medical before she was sent to lock for her pre-hearing charges. Anyway, throughout the process of her, kind of going back and forth to lock at the very beginning, you start having these interactions, and it does become a bit tedious to chase down the individual, lock them up, and then put them through pre-hearing and then do it all over again. So during these interactions, there is going to be some level of talk, like, what's going on? Why'd you do this today? Just to try to figure out what the issues are. And eventually, me and this inmate, she would listen to me. She respected my perspective, knew what I was about. Plus, I had a good reputation with the other inmates. And I remember there was a time where I was on Medline. She received meds. And there was an incident she was getting ready to have with another inmate, and I was able to talk her out of that incident. It would have been could have been a fight, what she took as disrespect. But you could see that she was trying to avoid the pressures of the environment. She was trying to do what was right. So she vented. There was another officer that was there that was from Trenton, or the Trenton area. And he had mentioned, he goes, "Hey, I got to talk to you." And by the way, I remember this. His hat was on backwards. That's a big thing for me. His hat was on backwards. He was a gentleman that I guess was raised in the hood. And he said, all this advice doesn't matter, because in the end of the day, you're not from where she's from. So you don't understand the challenges she's going through. And I kind of said, well, wait a second. I said, you know what? Maybe that's true. First of all, you don't really know me. I'm inner city too. But either way, I don't think that's what needs the justification here. I said, the point is, it's about where they need to go. So I don't need to get on their level and become this homeboy to go ahead and give good advice. As you can see, she's doing it. So it doesn't matter if I'm from the hood or not. The point is she's listening. So that's where the respect comes in. The fact is every time she seems to be going to lock, I seem to be the one taking her to lock. So it was the frequent of the interactions. And I think, eventually as stone-faced you want to be, we keep on interacting. Someone's going to have to speak. It is what it is. And I remember I kind of spoke out of frustration. Like, what are we doing here? Why are we doing this again? You just got out of lock. You just came back from training. But with that said, I didn't need to bring in, my background. I didn't need to bring in, my problems with my family, my mom's concerns, my dad's concerns. I was able to directly pull from the moment, pull from this constant interaction of having to secure her and taking her lock. I didn't have to bring out anything personal to build that relationship. All I had to do was say, hey, listen, we can't keep doing this. That this is just, it's too much. So what do we need to do to move forward from here? Because this is on you. I didn't have to go back and say, well, I know where you're coming from because I was raised in the hood. So I think the power of correcting behavior, one, you got to have control. Let's just put it that way. I was always in control. But two is dealing with what's in the moment. But there are some that do provide programming that do have to build on their experience because programs are a bit different. And maybe Russ could add on this. But Russ, what I was going to say is this for the programmers. I say this all to say, my interactions that built trust with this inmate, again, her trusting me, was built in our frequency of our interactions through the moment at the facility, where she kept on getting in trouble at the very beginning, and I happened just to be there. So the trust that was built in how I handled each situation and how we kind of just built respect along the line. But if I'm a treatment provider, then maybe that's a different type of trust. That's a trust from understanding that where I've been, because I need to build the trust from the beginning, because you're going to be programming me. So again, I get there has to be some level of experience that's provided. You just got to make sure it doesn't cross into something that could be exploitable. And usually the people that do their programs, they're used to telling these stories. So the stories are said with the boundaries in place, if that makes sense. But what's your thoughts, Russ? Because there was a lot there.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's different when you're when you're actually doling out that treatment. It's a different function, and you're not really you're not really tasked with having to enforce anything. I'm not in a position where I'm out there and finding dope on people, or writing them charges for fighting or any of that stuff. I'm not doing any kind of interdiction. I'm not trying to discover escape plots or anything else. I'm simply tasked with one thing, and that is to deliver a dosage of treatment to an individual, and try and put them on some kind of a groove, a path, if you will, to try and change. And so everything that we do out there is predicated on what our actual position dictates and requires from us. And so being able to understand like where an officer is coming from when they're giving out their dosage of law enforcement, to an individual who you are, trying to be a little bit more, soft with, you should be able to understand that. And I think sometimes that people don't. I'm really blessed now with, I understand the whole circle. I understand the dynamics of everything, I think, or at least I think I have a better viewpoint of it than people who haven't done all of those different sides of the job.
Yeah, it's more balanced. What would you do if you saw a fellow officer spending excessive time with a particular inmate? Again, we kind of touched this earlier, but if I saw that happen, it's funny because now that I'm in management, the hindsight bias, you kind of see how all pieces fit together, and then you wind up going back looking at how could stuff be prevented. You see that a lot more at the higher level. So now if I could look at my younger self, what would I say now with this type of experience in mind is, don't worry about, the social awkwardness of telling an officer, hey, I think you're a little too close with the inmate. But again, you're not going to do it in public. You're going to try to talk to them privately. But now the question is, if they don't listen, then there should be another effort where maybe you could talk to someone that's more has a better relationship with the individual, or sad to say, eventually you may have to bring the supervisor in because, I've seen it, and we talked about this before, the end result of an undue relationship where the person, pretends to not realize that they were going down a rabbit hole, but yet we all knew. And it's like, well, none of us did anything about it because we were more concerned about being wrong as opposed to being right. But I think the end of the day is, if I saw an officer spending excessive time with one particular inmate, I would definitely approach the officer. I would definitely communicate with them how I felt. Whether it's right or wrong, I'm going to communicate how I felt. That's the key. This is how it makes me feel. So at the end of the day, hopefully you're not overly involved, but every time I come in, this inmate seems to be at your desk. I just want to make you aware of it. And maybe, if you don't mind, maybe you could start taking a look at that yourself, maybe correcting the behavior if needed. And if the officer still didn't listen, at least they wouldn't be doing it in front of me. But once I started hearing rumors about the officer, because that's what's going to happen next, I would probably now, in hindsight bias, I would probably say, hey, it looks like everybody, is part of this rumor mill. Has anybody else tried to talk to the person? Because that's part of the process of setup. Part of the process is setting the person up is exploiting that individual, right? So maybe, let's say Russ is an inmate. Maybe Russ wants the other officers to see that because he expects the other officers are going to walk away as opposed to stepping up and doing the right thing. So now everybody here that's leaning in the gossip mill but hasn't talked to the officers also playing in to the game that's being played, because that's what the inmate wants. So who's the one person that said, hey, guys, let's not be gossiping about this officer. How about we all talk to the officer? Let them all know how we feel, and then go from there. And then eventually, if that doesn't work, then if there's some official need for documentation, then we'll go that route. But let's just talk to the officer instead of making it gossip mill, because then what happens here is when you wind up going to address the officer, everybody else seems to know about it. Now the officer's in defensive mode because at the end of the day, as no one confronted him, he found out through the gossip mill, or she found out through the gossip mill. What's your thoughts there, Russ?
Yeah, I think we did that in the prior one, but it's just something that you have to address, and you have to address it at the appropriate level. Where is this gone? Is this worthy of a conversation, or is this worthy of trying to actually the beginning of an investigation? Whichever way it goes, you just have to be comfortable with it because it just is what it is.
All right, Russ. So the next one is, again, we could go through these real quick. How do inmates use the tit-for-tat dynamic to create obligation in staff, which, as I said, I think is rooted a lot in the manipulation games that are played. Obligation, some level of false trust, personal connection, but obligation is key here too.
Yeah, it's just, quid pro quo, and that's the way the human dynamic works, though. I mean, it really is. People may not like that, but we're human beings, and so we're transactional. And because we're transactional, we can feel obligated due to quid pro quo, tit for tat, whatever else we want to call it. Don't ever feel that way, and make sure you try not to fall into those little traps.
Yeah, and guys, when me and Russ were working on Inside the Hive, remember, quid pro quo is not just favors. It could be relationship driven. It could be connection driven. So just be wary of what relationships you're establishing. Because remember, an inmate that's successful at manipulation is the one that doesn't want you to look their way because they are unique. They are the good one. All right, let's get the next one. Hey, Russ, why are compliments and flattery so dangerous in correction setting? That kind of falls into quid pro too, by the way. But if I just can add something on this, compliments and flattery usually affect the person, it could affect the function if the person relates to the function to a point they identify with the function. So I think this is where the game is pretty advanced. Like if I got someone that's very surface, all about vanity, then maybe they come to work all dressed up, nice little makeup there. Maybe I do some superficial compliments on how they look or how they smell, and maybe some of them absorb that as opposed to correcting the inmate. But there are some people that love the job that they do. They identify with the job, and complimenting the function of the job could be something that they highly embrace and value because of their connection to the work. So with that said, you have to always make sure that if a compliment's coming your way, that I'm not going to say, I mean, maybe there really is a compliment about how you do your job, but you have to make sure that the boundary's in play, that you're not dependent on that compliment, if that makes sense. Like, if someone's complimenting me, is that a compliment that's really about the function, or is it a compliment where I'm going to want to rely on that for their approval? So again, people that are very strong in their sense of self and who they are, I don't need compliments to keep moving. So again, a compliment on flattery, that's easy for me to say, hey, not appropriate. Why? Because it's not appropriate. Compliments about the job, a bit different, because they're compliments about the job, about the function. So you don't want to go harsh and say, hey, not appropriate, but you may want to make sure that you are not reliant on that. I've had inmates come up, hey, just wanted to let you know, great job on saving that inmate's life when you were in the unit. I'm not going to tell the inmate, hey, I'm not taking a compliment from you. But I appreciate that. And you keep it moving. I guess the key is the compliment is not something you're going to rely on to be effective, because compliments could become a standard that you feel that you may have to meet. So again, for the compliments about beauty, I'm not even tolerating those. Done. Don't need to hear it. Don't do it again. You'll be written up or whatever it is. Just set the standard immediately on that. That's not even a boundary. That's a barrier. But compliments on a work function, you just got to make sure how you absorb it doesn't mean that you're reliant on it, and really listen to the words that are being said about the compliment. Because at the end of the day, if the compliment about your work function is what makes you unique and not like everyone else, then you may want to go ahead and say, you know what, that's a compliment I'm not taking. I'm sorry. Because at the end of the day, you want to say, I'm not like the rest of my team. I'm going to disagree. I do things in alignment with what my team values. So that's not a compliment to me. And next time we try to play that game, maybe I'll charge you or whatever the case may be, if that makes sense. What do you got, Russ?
Yeah, I would just break it down a little bit more simply than that. Basically is they give a compliment in an expectation of I've been nice to you. Now you have to be nice to me, even if something happens. So now you can't correct me as harshly. Now maybe you can't sanction me for something. I come back with, let's say it's like a dirty test. So, now all of a sudden they've tried to, mitigate the consequences by giving a compliment. And I think that often it's as simple as that. It's an emotional quid pro quo.
I like that, Russ. That's I agree with that too. Okay, let's speak through this some more. How can financial stress make officers vulnerable to inmate manipulation? In my book, Inmate Manipulation Decoded, there was a story about an officer who was a stand-up officer literally for 24 years and change, and then was going through a divorce situation or pressure, wind up changing the individual and how they acted. Inmates saw that the officer was desperate, made an offer. At that point, that officer couldn't refuse. And the next thing you know, the officer got compromised. And it was funny because everybody looked at the officer like they were a fool. How could they do that after 24 years of being this elite officer? And that's because his life situation changed. So with that said, now the inmates see that you're in a state of desperation. It could be just as simple as you used to come to work, dressed, nice, clothes iron, whatever. Now all of a sudden you're a little bit sloppy in your appearance, and that's an extreme that the inmates will pick up on. They're very big at picking up on any shift, and to them that's going to be an extreme. And they may say, hey, something's going on with the home life, and now all of a sudden the game shifts. It becomes a little different, and the pressure could be, hey, I know you're going through something. We found out you got a one-time offer. Don't think on it. Act now, or else the offer's gone. So I think it really relates to the pressure that people could be facing and not being aware of how that pressure can be perceived. So again, if you know what you're going through, inmates, there's a good chance that if you don't protect it, the inmates are going to know. So you got to be very wary of the stuff that's happening in your personal life that you wind up taking to work with you without you truly being aware, because the inmates will be aware. Next thing you know, they're going to take advantage of the situation to get to you. So an officer that was untouchable turns out to be not so untouchable. Situations change, and that's why you always got to be wary that the game could be played on anyone, because it relates to the situation you're in. That can make you vulnerable, and not so much the person being vulnerable, but the pressures of the situation that the inmate can use as leverage in their favor. What's your thoughts on that, Russ?
Yeah, I think that, that's kind of a deeply individual type of thing. I think that we should all ask ourselves, what is our idea of desperation? And if you're answering that, that you could fall down that far, I think it's time to re-examine, whether or not you belong, inside the business at all or not. When I think of, desperation with regards to, financial obligations, desperation to me, at least, I think is actually going out and asking for help, not from inmates, obviously, but from my friends, and or picking up extra shifts or doing whatever else I need to do. I think that if your sense of desperation is anything and everything, and you're gonna violate what your ostensible and not real canons of morality are, then I feel like there's maybe nowhere that you won't stoop to. But I think that might be a bigger discussion for another day.
Yeah, I like what you said. If I could add something just at a higher level, I like what you said. So somewhere maybe desperation could equate to some lack of limited resources, or you don't feel that you have the resources in play, because you could see someone who's scared to run a unit, and the inmate could see that they're afraid, and now they offer the terms of protecting them, and out of desperation, instead of finding their support amongst their peers, they wind up feeling the resource from the inmate population. So again, desperation, whoever answers that desperation, whatever that is, whoever becomes that resource is the person that truly has the authority over you. Because again, you're here and they're above you saying, I can help you. And that is definitely an act of desperation. That's definitely a quid quo pro that leads to obligation that really does bias how you handle that inmate. All right, Russ, we're almost done. We've got a few more left. Hey, Russ, we could speak through it. I'll let you go first. We'll alternate going first in a second. So what are the early red flags that someone is becoming too familiar with an inmate?
So the things that really look at with regards to that is, we have a social dynamic within, any given facility. So if your orientation is toward it, not just an inmate, but inmates in general, if that is where your social group is, that's a big red flag, because what happens is you're often becoming, sorted out and separated from where your social and professional support system should be, which should be your brothers and sisters in green or gray or whatever colored uniform you guys are in. If your social support network is coming from the inmates, then you're identifying with them. And if you identify with them, you will adopt what their moral code is. And if you adopt what their moral code is, then there's nothing that you won't bring in. There's no level that you won't go to, or at least you will dip too far down that suddenly you can be compromised, because now all of a sudden you've done something little, and a little tiny lever can move the world, as it were. And so you're in great danger, and you're placing other people in great danger.
Yeah, and I would say from the outside looking in, if I'm watching that officer, behavior is key, changing their behaviors. Maybe they're visiting an area a little too much that they shouldn't. If it's internal, you're the officer that's being compromised, change your mindset. Looking forward to seeing the inmate could be a part of that. But with that said, again, you feel it before it's seen. That's how I see things. So technically, if if you recognize something doesn't feel right, you're the first person that should act. Because if we see it through your behavior, then my first question is, hey, what shifted your mindset? This is an officer or staff member that came in with a corrupted mindset. So somewhere something happened along the line that you should have caught first before we saw it. So that's something I think matters. I think you recognize it first before we recognizing it. And then maybe it's going back. And if I do see it carried out in the behavior, maybe it's going back, talking to the individual, like, how do we get this far? What happened that you literally are in this unit more than you should be? And there's a lot of different behaviors. We're not going to cover every behavior, but no, a shift in behaviors would be something that we should see. But first should be the person shifting their mindset, because that's going to translate into their behaviors. Complacent behaviors, a bunch of behaviors. All right, Russ, how can you tell the difference between professional empathy and emotional involvement? And Russ, you used the word tactical empathy.
Yeah, there's a lot towards getting inside these people's heads in order to head off a lot of different things. There's a lot of different facets to this. I tend to look a lot towards what's happening in the STG realm. I tend to try and look at what's going on with individuals who are trying to either compromise someone or compromise a situation or put themselves into a position where they're able to maybe exploit some kind of security breach. So that's just the way that I look at that whole the whole tactical empathy thing, being able to understand their drivers and what it is that they're doing. And so when you're able to actually understand their motivations, then you can work backwards from that to try and use a little bit of creative thinking, a little bit of critical thinking, to understand what it is that they might do next, or to understand what they might have already done, and to put yourself into a position, to actually, intervene in an incident or in a contraband drop or any other thing. And that's just, one of the tools that you can use when you start to, get to a little more, advanced corrections, not the 101 stuff, but the 501 stuff.
And then, what's funny is we talked about behaviors before. So an example could be defending the inmate when deep down inside what they did was wrong, feeling guilt, carrying the weight for them. So like Russ said before about accountability, the inmate's accountable for their behaviors. You may have some level of responsibility over their behaviors, but they're the ones that are held accountable. And sometimes you've seen staff that get so caught up with the inmate that they wind up justifying their negative behavior or trying to defend it, because at the end of the day, they feel somehow that they're held accountable for that, because maybe there's a guilt game being played or the blame game. So I would say at this point, again, it's the shift in mindset to the point where not only are you wearing their shoes, but you start feeling sorry for the individuals, or you start taking on emotions that you haven't really put boundaries up for. So again, this is more to me, as he said, it's about emotion, but I love what Russ talked about tactical. I can understand how it is to be in your shoes without wearing it, because at the end of the day, I need to create boundaries. And what I'm not going to allow you to do is to bias me into affecting what should be non-negotiables for most of our correctional objectives. Okay. When does being human cross into dangerous territory? We'll alternate, Russ. I'll start first. Being soft is not being human. So when this person asked this question, I want to make sure that people understand that I grew up a little bit right now with this perspective. And now that, I've been overseeing at some level the facilitating of programmings, not the programs itself, but the facilitating of programs. I know a lot of people would equate soft to being human. No, you have to be human. Your decisions are balanced between being fair, firm, and consistent. But part of that, of course, is going to have some level of human approach. That doesn't mean you're soft. That does not mean you are gullible. But at the end of the day, if you allow being human as your excuse or your justification for being soft, you're the one misusing it. Not what the term is meant for. Being human is literally about being human. But now if you're gullible, or as I said, you're now trying to say, well, we're human, and that's why, I allowed the inmate to do all this. No, you're gullible. That's nothing to do with being human. You're just gullible. So I think here, I don't want to equate being human to being soft. I think they're two different things. But I think sadly, when someone crosses the line, we as the outside may view it as being soft, but they may justify it as just being human. And that's how the terms got blended. They're not. We're all human in what we do. We understand the profession from that type of level. We just have boundaries. But when they become excuses for doing something wrong, well, I was just being human, that's bastardizing the term being human. And that's actually used as an excuse, but technically people think it's a justification for crossing the line. Does that make sense, Russ?
Yeah, I would just say this with regards to that is, we're all human, but if we try and make sure that we are being the best human that we can be, that we're bringing, a high level of professionalism to the job, we're bringing, a high operating function where, we are not making ourselves vulnerable through our vices, but rather we're making ourselves better through our virtues. And, really, isn't there a distinction, between, people who are, working at developing their virtues versus those that are, pandering to their vices? And isn't that the difference between, being the consummate correctional professional or being an inmate?
True. Russ, we're down to the last set of questions. Some of them we kind of touched on in our discussion, so we could speed through some of these. Just let me know. But this one, you can go first on if you want. What's the most effective way to maintain professional boundaries while still treating inmates with dignity? I think we covered that pretty much throughout this whole dialogue.
So, yeah, I just say this is the label that you wear as a correctional officer doesn't preclude you from doing something that's helpful or kind or instrumental towards doing something that an inmate has a need for. We're not we're not robots, we're not automatons. You can still within the bounds of what your professional duties are, get that inmate what they need at that moment. You can facilitate their access towards, whether it's some programming or whether it's, facilitate access to medical or whatever else is there. There's nothing that precludes you from doing that. And in fact, because that is what part of your duties are, you should be doing those things. Now, that doesn't mean that you're a pushover. You're not giving anybody anything extra. But what you are doing is you're trying to put as many inmates in the frame of mind that, hey, we should continue to program in this manner because, our needs are being met. You can do a whole lot towards, turning down the temperature of any given unit, any given yard, just by, not giving something for inmates to seize on and develop unity, which is very dangerous, but also a discussion for another day.
Yeah, and guys, your defined role, prescribed role, treatment side, safety security side is all about treating inmates with dignity. So if you stay within your prescribed role, you do meet the standard of treating inmates with dignity. I mean, it's that simple. To be honest with you, it's when you start going outside of your prescribed role that you start to adjust in how you treat the inmates. So with that said, I would just stay true to the defined role, making sure that you do what's expected of you from the agency and let that now translate into treating inmates with dignity because they are directly related. You don't have to shift one to meet the other. So whoever asked that question, it's a great question, but know that the balance is already in play with your prescribed role. I don't have to shift anything to meet the needs of inmate dignity when that's explained through my role. All right, let's see. Next one. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Last few, Russ. How do you handle it when an inmate tries to make you feel guilty for enforcing rules? If I go first on this, I just want to mention, I'll give you a quick story. Inmate was going down the wrong wing, wasn't supposed to go down there. I wrote the inmate up. The inmate did see I had a wedding ring, assumed I had a family, and then basically said, basically if I wrote her up, she couldn't see the family, and you know how that would make you feel if you couldn't see your kids. And I took that two ways. One, I took that as, are you blaming me for what you did and now me holding you accountable, or are you trying to make me feel guilty? Now, the funny thing is, I don't know if sometimes guilt and blame intertwine, but I took the blame part of that first, which caused me to react immediately and said, hey, you're responsible for this, not me. My job is to hold you accountable. You went ahead and did what you weren't supposed to do. So I'm reacting to what you did. Now, some people may see the guilt in that. I saw the blame. And I think somewhere along the line, as I mentioned, they can intertwine. But either way, you can't allow the inmate to get you to fall into either one of those. At the end of the day, you're responsible for those actions. And I will be quick to put it back on them, because I see when they try to push guilt, I see as if they're trying to blame me. And I will not sit there and, one, allow them to blame me for something that they did, and two, deter me from doing what my job is, which is to hold you accountable. So at the end of the day, you could tell your kids why you didn't get a chance to visit them. It's pretty much you went down, did something you weren't supposed to do, and then my expected role had to come in, which was to write you up, and then you got sanctioned. Any thoughts on that, Russ?
Yeah, you see this all the time. People engage in an action, and then they want to put the fact that they took that action, the blame onto other people, and they want to, justify things and be able to, wiggle out of it. And so, just don't let them. And that's the part where, coming back and relying on our professional bearing, as it were, is really important. And that's the point at which, yes, man, a little bit of, stone cold calculation and veneer with regards to not letting them chip away at that is really important. This is the time for you to be, not as human as they would like you to be, perhaps.
All right, Russ, almost done. If you want to go through this one first, how does undue familiarity affect team dynamic and facility security?
Yeah, the thing about the undue familiarity is, it can creep in, and it can cause all kinds of problems, even from an institutional level. And so, we have to look at, ways that inmates will breach security, in ways inmates will use, intelligence gathering against us, the ways, inmates will, try and leverage things so that an outcome, is less bad for them, or an outcome is even, good and prosperous from their point of view, not our point of view. And so, you just have to realize that there is a level of influence that will always be exerted, and it's up to us to mitigate that in a way where it doesn't have a bad effect on safety and security. And I think that that's just the way you have to look at it. This is all a big game, and it's up to you to make sure that you're moving your pieces on the board in the direction that they should be going.
Yeah, and guys, undue familiarity is a layered process. It works under the surface. So with that said, if undue familiarity starts to set in, we may have an idea of what we want this facility to be, or how we want this team to be. But at the end of the day, it's surface. Everything's been eroded because of the fact that we're allowing inmates to get overly involved with our staff. And again, it does affect the team dynamic, because instead of the team trying to reinforce the standards of what a professional relationship is, they avoid the interaction with the staff member who's been corrupted. And that's the truth. 90% of the time, the staff are going to avoid the staff that they feel are corrupted, because they don't trust the staff member anymore. So they don't want to engage. So then you give the inmate this isolation, which is what they want. The most success for inmates when it comes to manipulation, especially undue, because now this is the process of manipulation, is isolation. That's their goal. And we tend to do that ourselves. So all they got to do is exploit very subtly that there's a connection with them. Between the staff member and the inmate. And then what we tend to do is some may have the courage to correct, but 9 times out of 10, we rather gossip about it. And now the inmate is able to play their game without any level of counter influence. So I think it does affect the team dynamic because the person does become isolated. And now at this point, they're sheep. They're just sheep because we're not reinforcing the standards. We rather gossip about it. All right, Russ, last 3 questions. This is it. How can one officer's poor judgment compromise an entire facility? We kind of just touched on that, right?
Yeah. I think we've gone through that. It's just all it takes is the weakest link, and once the weakest link breaks, then you can have contraband, you can have escape attempts. You can have, the death of staff and the death of inmates, over these things. And we've seen that played out in a lot of different roles, as it were, even within the last year.
Hey, Russ, you also have to add, you wrote a book on complacency. Let's add that here because undue familiarity is all about putting some level of trust to that inmate population, whether directly or indirectly. That's what it's about, which also automatically leads to the erosion of good, effective practices because, again, not that inmate, they're special. So I think complacency falls into this as well. Would you agree?
Yeah, I have a chapter in. Yes, I have a chapter in the book called emotional familiarity, and that's just one aspect. I mean, there's other aspects beyond emotional familiarity that can happen here. I mean, it can be outright extortion, but it often begins with that emotional familiarity.
Yep. And last 2. Hey, Russ, what support systems? I'll start first. What support systems should facilities have in place to prevent these situations? Okay, so real quick, there should be no judgment if someone is trying to tell you that they may be growing a bit undue. We have to make sure that people trust us enough to know that we're not going to outcast them, because the key here is that you want to support the person. You can't do it after it happened. So you want to show support for the system to be preventive, not, oh, the person got corrupted. Oh, you know what? They were a lost cause anyway. Well, if we believe that inmate manipulation does take time and could happen, then we have to put in place a way for us to communicate that without being judged by it. Because, guys, we are human, and humans do crave for interaction. So it's good for us to be able to find a way that we can communicate these interactions and then help each other through it. I think the big concern here is most people are afraid to say something because they're afraid that they're going to be judged as if they're already corrupted. We make errors. I have seen, an officer maybe at the first step, we'll do something very superficial, give an inmate their personal pen, and then the sergeant say, hey, let me talk to you for a second. Hey, here's why we don't want to do that. And then explain it. And then the officer sees that I wasn't being judged. He was being helpful. So now this opens up the door for that officer now to maybe go back to that supervisor or that peer. So I think also to make this part of our culture where we sit there and we're actively involved in each other's successes. So we keep those communications going. So if the person does do something, they're not afraid about being embarrassed. They're more motivated by, let me go talk to Russ. He's been there for me before. He'll help bring me clarity. Because a lot of the questions that we answer on this channel are questions that people are afraid to ask their own peers. How crazy is that? You're afraid to ask your peers because you're going to be judged. So you'll do it anonymously on this channel to 2 strangers, technically. And that should not be how the system works. The system should work where the same questions we answer here, you could also find right next to you, because you know that I can trust this person because they're not going to judge me. So thank God we have this venue, because this venue is supposed to start the momentum to ask those questions. But eventually the facility, your peers, they have to learn how to appreciate those questions and not approach those questions with judgment, but rather curiosity. Because here's a question I would also ask myself. If you came to me and I was your peer and you were concerned about a relationship that you may be having with an inmate that could be a little bit blurred. Now, granted, you haven't gotten to the point where it's corrupted. It's still preventable. Then the only question I would ask myself first before I can answer that is, how did we allow that to happen? Let's make it a partnership effort. If that inmate got too close to you, right? And granted, I'm not minimizing your accountability, but then also we were a part of that too, because something that we did could have probably prevented this relationship. Because the first thing an inmate looks at before they manipulate is, will the environment allow this to happen? Let's not forget that part. So again, not to minimize accountability, but we're all have some level of responsibility. If someone gets caught up, we have to always go back. Because remember, how many people say, man, I saw it happening. Yeah, but you didn't do nothing. So we all have a sense of accountability towards each other. But at the end of the day, if we choose not to react, then it could be a culture thing where the culture just decides, hey, once we feel they're undue, we cut that person off. Really? Knowing that manipulation is a process that takes people down a rabbit hole, we don't do anything preventive to try to work with the individual. No, we just judge them. What's your thoughts, Russ?
Well, there's a few different things. Number one is if you have a really strong culture, there should be ways to address that. I would say beyond that, and this is just like looking at what good practices would look like. If you provide training on what deconfliction looks like, and you have a way to self-report or bring it to the attention, hey, you know what? I realize I've been spending too much time around this inmate. I think that it's, affected my ability to see clearly, and a way to, ship that inmate out, move that person to a different area or whatever. Then I think that we're well served by that. One of the bad things about corrections typically, though, is people don't want to listen to that type of thing. And we want to, kind of become complacent and assume that everything is fine until it's too far along. So, if an institution wants to develop, some type of deconfliction class and a tool or something to self-report and say, hey, you know what, I could be compromised in this area, more power to you. But that's, not typically how it works, especially if the culture is weak. In the fact that, hey, they're not willing to go out on a limb and report something that they see. They're only willing to talk about it after the fact, after somebody gets, marched off and terminated on the spot, and then, pat yourself on the back. Yeah, I saw that coming. Well, how come it didn't happen sooner then? How come you didn't, make some type of proactive effort?
Yeah, and that was an evolution of our thought process as well, because we were able a while ago to separate ourselves from it. But as you start to move up, at least for me and Russ, what we witnessed more, especially looking at the different videos like Vicky White and Joyce Mitchell and all this other stuff, it's when you're looking at inmates that can strategize, yeah, maybe Russ was my target, but there were a lot of other things in play that made that target more accessible. And I think now that I've grown in this profession, and seeing, all these incidences of manipulation, and how, like in Vicky White's case, the facility was complacent in general. And in Joyce Mitchell, you have the other senior officer that allowed this interaction to occur. So, I mean, there's always something else in play that falls at some lesser level, but still has some level of complacency or some level of action could have been taken. Okay, so last question, Russ. Easy one. What legal consequences officers face when boundaries are crossed? The obvious, right? Losing your job, going to jail, losing your family, everything you worked up for. Again, that's external. Shouldn't be something that keeps you motivated, because at the end of the day, you're doing things for the right reason. So, I'm not doing it because someone's watching me. I'm doing it because it's what I'm expected to do. It's what I'm trusted to do. So I would like to think that even though you could talk about the external consequences and try to keep people motivated, the job is to keep people inspired. And because when you cross these lines, it's your integrity overall. It's your principles. It's your values that you're compromising or you're sacrificing, which makes us wonder, did you ever have them to begin with? Because when you do have them, you don't shift. You stay true to who you are. And that's the one thing that comes into the profession with you. Your values, your principles, your integrity. Hopefully it aligns with what the profession expects of you. And then you should be able to feel that shift, regardless of what your experience is. You should be able to feel that something doesn't feel right. It doesn't connect with you internally. And that would be what you base your decisions on. But if you base your decisions on what's conditional, going to jail or whatever, it's conditional on the trust you have with an inmate. Because if I trust Russ and he's an inmate, and all of a sudden, maybe Russ is different, he won't turn me in or whatever it is, those external consequences don't matter. And inmates know that. Inmates know if you're run by external consequences, I'll build a trust with you. And as long as I say I won't turn you in, none of that shit matters. But once you say no, why? Because I don't believe in that. I'm not here for that. I have integrity. Then the game shifts. The inmate can't move you. It's the broken record. But at least the broken record comes from a place of inspiration, not from conditions that could be thrown out once the inmate gets you to trust them. Final thoughts on that, Russ?
Just that there's at some point there is a spot from which you cannot come back, and I kind of like think about some of the things that I've seen over the years, and I kind of think about what motivated people to get there. And I think that, it's up to us, because we are, correctional law enforcement officers, to, be the ones to, spot it and deal with it and do whatever it takes to make, our facility safe, regardless of any, personal feelings you have about that individual. And so, it's just one of those things where we have to be, hard as nails, tough as nails, and do what is required of us with regards to our duty, our obligation, and our oath.
And guys, you have to treat, as we wrap this up, I want to mention something. You have to treat manipulation, undue familiarity, whatever, as a verb. Corruption, I get, is an outcome. I get it. But corrupting, ing, is what could happen. And corrupting is not just about bringing in contraband or having sex with inmates. It's giving inmates information they shouldn't have, or giving them personal information, or, just basically falling for the games that they play in an effort for you to bias your professional decision-making. Corrupting could be the process of you not being as effective. Corrupting could be you falling into complacency. Corrupting could be a divide between you and your peers because the inmate has fueled that divide. So with that said, I think that if we start seeing corrupting or undue familiarity as a verb, as a process, now we start to see where we play in. But if you start to see it just as an end result, then you could put your hands up, right? What already happened? There's not much I could do about it. No, hold on. You missed out on the process. Corrupting leads to corruption. Let's just make sure we highlight corrupting and undue and manipulation as an ongoing process in which we're all a part of, whether successful or not. We're a part of either preventing it or allowing it to happen. Because again, corruption, it's a two-way street. You can't manipulate somebody if, one, they don't want to be manipulated, and two, if the environment doesn't allow it. If the environment doesn't allow it, then it becomes the main obstacle that will deter even the effort. Because remember, one last thing, inmates look for time. If I could corrupt Russ, but it would take too much time, I'm going to go to a softer target. Why would it take too much time? Well, Russ is pretty strong-willed, or the environment, Russ has good resources, good connections. So even if he has a moment of vulnerability, he's going to go to his peers. So I'm going to pretend to be that corrupted. I'm going to pretend to be that manipulative inmate. I see Russ. Russ is making moves. Russ is in my way. Maybe there's a way I can get to Russ. So the first thing I look at is the environment first. If I'm an inmate, I'm going to look at the environment. Can I get Russ alone? Can I isolate him? Well, yeah, he's the unit officer. Now we start talking about Russ as a person. Is he vulnerable? But the first thing inmates look at is the environment. Will the environment allow it? Well, you have a supervisor that comes in twice but doesn't really talk to staff. This unit is a camps. It's a satellite unit. So there's not many people coming in. So we definitely have the environment. Now let's focus on Russ. How can we make the game applicable to Russ? But it starts with the environment first. Russ, anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yeah, I think this is a good discussion. The only thing that I would say is even though we've talked about this from a viewpoint of corruption and more total manipulation, there's a lot of situations out there that inmates are just as happy to deal with that never end up at the corruption level, nor were they ever intended to. So don't assume that just because that they're targeting someone or they're targeting you, that corruption is their end goal, because often it's just being able to put you into a position not to recognize something that they're doing that is exploiting security in some way. Maybe you're not searching as hard as you should be. Maybe you're just maybe you're still writing them up, but you're giving them a warning instead of actual charges. Whatever it is, just be aware that corruption is not always the be all end all goal.
And guys, there's a show on Fox right now called Snakes. I think it's 6 episodes in by the time of me airing this. And it is a game about manipulation. I love how it works. There's a girl named Catherine on it. And maybe one day me and Russ could break down these reality shows because a lot of it deals with manipulation. But it's funny because this will play out here real quick. Is she kind of reads off this list. I think she AI'd a list of manipulation tactics, and she'll do something, and then they'll cut back to her, and she'll be like, number 27, exploit divides, or number 25, do this or do that. And then the funny thing is we see it because obviously it's, how they edit it. I'm assuming living there may be a bit different. But there is a part where they expose that she's lying and that she's playing games. But this is a little bit later into the season. It's about halfway through the season, maybe a little bit more. And the people that she has exploited has refused to believe it because they have made their own justifications for her actions. So even though we clearly know who this person is, they have gotten involved with it, that now they've made justifications because now their mindset has shifted. So I just want to say this to end it. If you're getting overly involved with an inmate, the reason why you have to make sure you do the right thing or we address it immediately is because excuses will become justifications. And what winds up happening here is if me and Russ decide to help you, that justification becomes a belief. And once it becomes a belief, it's harder for us to get you back to where you need to be. That's the key. Once it's an excuse, we could work with an excuse. But once you start believing in it and that belief becomes a justification, it's added obstacles that most people don't have the energy to deal with. I'm going to be honest with you. So it's harder to change a belief than it is an excuse. As always, guys, the show is Tear Talk. Please be safe and catch you next time around.